All right, I can see your screen there, folks. So once again, we'll turn over the time to Jim Wright and Brent Bateman from the Utah Office of Property Rights Ombudsman. Thanks.
Mr. Control, can you bring up the little screen that shows when questions come up so that we can see that?
I absolutely will. Okay, you've got the ball.
Good to see you. I'm Brent. This is Jim, my colleague at the Ombudsman's office.
Hey.
We're very glad to be here today, and we're very grateful to be able to talk to you about the legislative update. If you can't hear us or you have any questions or anything, pipe up. Absolutely, we're happy to try to answer whatever questions you have. Once again, we really enjoyed this year at the legislature as acting in our usual role as bemused spectators. We find watching what the legislature does quite entertaining. We don't usually participate very much, but it's fun to watch and try to keep up on what's going on. I would say, Jim, that this year the legislature was a year of lots of big things and lots of little things, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, absolutely. There were the big bills that everybody's aware of: transportation, healthy Utah, prison, that sort of dominated the headlines. And then, in terms of, land use, there really wasn't much that was, I would say, at least headline grabbing, controversial. Although some interesting things did still happen. A
lot of interesting details. And there are a few things that you really ought to be aware of. But with all the work they spent on raising taxes and stuff like that, they really didn't have a lot of time for other things. We are going to focus on just the land use bills. There are a lot of things that happen, I'm sure, that local governments need to be aware of. I have a personal rule to never read anything that I don't care about, and that would be some of those things. And so the land use things are what I'm interested in, and so we're going to go ahead and talk about those kinds of things.
Absolutely. We'll hit a couple of government operations and regulations as well, and then just let you know a couple of the bills that did not pass, just so you're aware, as they may be coming back. So,
okay, let's jump right in. SB 124. That was the main land use bill that came out of the Land Use Task Force. If you're not aware, every year during the interim, in between legislative sessions, a group of attorneys and representatives from all areas of land use, some representing developers, some builders, the League of Cities and Towns, government attorneys, they all get together during the interim, and they talk about different ideas and bills, and they try to negotiate and hash out what the best thing to do with those are, so that we can go to the legislature without having to have a big fight there. We sort of have the fight during the summer. And we end up with, usually with one or two bills that usually is able to go through because all the interested parties have already signed off on it. And SB 124 is that bill for this year, sponsored by Senator Stevenson. It really does four things, some of which are very minor, some of which are kind of important. I think probably the most important thing that this bill does, the local government needs to be aware of, has to do with infrastructure improvement assurance and warranties. This is bonding. This is what we always say are bonds that we have developers put up, to make sure that they don't flake out, to make sure that what they are planning to do actually happens. A few years ago, there were some changes to this law that drew an important distinction between infrastructure improvement insurance, which is the bond that you get at the time of subdivision in order to make sure that the subdivision improvements are put in. A distinction between that and improvement warranties, which is the bond that you get after the subdivision is complete, that you hold for a year or so to make sure that what was installed, as it should have been, and that it doesn't break down. That distinction was made a couple of years ago, and what happened this year with this kind of, sort of improved that distinction a little bit. Those are two separate things, and it's important to keep them separate. And we can talk about the details of what happened a couple of years ago, if you'd like. But what happened this year specifically is a provision was put in saying that the infrastructure improvement insurance, that's the bond to make sure that all the improvements get done, that can only be used for public improvements. So that's used for things like roads and utilities and stuff like that. the objection from the developer side of the coin was that that was being used for private improvements as well, not only public improvements, but private improvements like clubhouses and swimming pools. And the rules were changed this year so that that can no longer be. You cannot require a developer to bond for private improvements. It can only be public improvements. Now, some language was also tweaked to make it clear that you can enter into contracts, into development agreements to require completion of those kinds of private improvements. So if they're saying they're going to build a pool or a clubhouse or something private like that, you want to put that in the development agreement, and you want to do whatever assurance you can get them to agree to in the development agreement to make sure that happens. And that's the way you're going to enforce that. You're just not going to enforce that with the infrastructure improvement bonds going forward. So that's just something to keep in mind about that.
And another big thing that this bill did was to limit the requirements of, or to limit who has to or who can sign a plat. And so there's a limitation where if you don't either own property on a plat, or if you're not a utility that will be servicing the plat, then there can't be a requirement that you sign the plat. 'Cause what would happen on occasion, apparently, is that some other entity, perhaps a district or some other entity would have rights to approve a plat, and they could potentially use that to leverage getting some sort of exaction from the developer. And so this bill limits the people that can sign the plat and thereby hold out approval in order to get some sort of concession from a developer.
What this basically means, this part of it basically means is if you have an ordinance that says that in order to get a subdivision approved, you have to have, say, the president of the local water company sign the plat, and the local water company doesn't have any property or own any property on the plat, you can no longer do that. You can no longer have someone who doesn't own property on the plat or doesn't have some kind of legal interest in what happens on the plat sign the plat. It's actually fairly common for a place to say, you know, we have this concern in this area, so go and get them to sign the plat and make sure that they're okay with it. And unless they actually have property in the plat area, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, and there's also a tweak here with the surveyors where there needs to be a consultation by the surveyor with any owner or operator of an underground utility or facility.
It's important to remember that in the before the surveyor, you could require the surveyor to sign. Now it just requires a consultation. So you really, you know, under the statute, you need to look at it closely. The surveyor only is required to consult, not required to sign anymore. Any questions about that, speak up. Any questions about that or the bonding part, speak up. We can talk about that at whatever length you'd like.
Yeah, and just a reminder, you can put those questions in the chat box or the Q&A box, and then I'll forward those on to Jim and Brett.
Great.
Another thing that this bill did is it allows local governments to exempt a subdivision for a utility infrastructure from the zoning ordinances. So this means that if you needed to get a little parcel for a small substation or utility box or some other utility infrastructure, municipalities can now exempt that, and counties' land use authorities can exempt that from any sort of zoning regulation, just to make it easier for the utilities. So.
And there's also a language in this bill about common areas and modifying common areas. And what the bill says now is that if you get 75% of approval of the owners, you can modify common areas now. It's pretty simple, pretty detailed, but those are the things that were negotiated over the summer. Some of which came to the land use task force with some pretty heavy political clout. I heard most of the negotiations, and I would say that they went well. They were profitable, and they were useful. These kind of compromises can sometimes be hard to get to, and there was a lot of work and a lot of arguing to get there. But I think it ended about as well as it could have ended. So.
Right. So another bill here, school planning and zoning. This is a bill that is trying to help the school districts and local governments to communicate better. It outlines certain information that a school district or charter school must give to the local government, during their meeting that's required to happen. Besides requiring a meeting, it doesn't really go any further than that. There's no penalties involved. There's nothing a local government or jurisdiction can do really other than require a traffic study. But even with that, there's no further action it can take on the traffic study. So this is more of a, I'd say, Brent, make sure you get together, and we want you to give this information, and more of a...
Yeah, before the law was changed this year, the law already said that local governments and school districts should get together to talk about, schools and citing of schools and stuff like that. And it really just said, get together and talk. It didn't say, what you need to do with the information you get out of that discussion. Just, it said, get together and talk. And what this bill does, is this says, get together and talk and have a useful talk. It says, when you talk about this, talk about traffic, talk about these other things, provide information, right? But it's still just a conversation. It still just says, get together and talk. Have a useful talk, a productive discussion, hopefully. But what do you do with that information? Who knows?
Yeah. Maybe there will be another bill in the future. Okay, so the agriculture structure amendments. This relates to a high tunnel, which is defined in the bill as a non-permanent structure. So it's built of things like plastic, or covered with things like plastic, or woven materials, flexible things, basically, so it's not meant to be a permanent structure, and that is used for the storage of agricultural commodities. So in the background there, you can see a picture of an example. It looks like it's some sort of canvas or plastic sort of material covering that structure, and that would be an example of a high tunnel. And this bill clarifies that high tunnels are exempt from municipal building codes, and they did limit it just to municipalities, and also from assessments. So it's not something that can be considered when assessing for taxation purposes. So
this is definitely one of those bills that smells like it came out of some specific event.
Yeah, there's a story behind this one. That
probably one of you know the story. It might have happened in your community or something. I know that when this bill was first introduced, it wasn't just the non-permanent structures with the fabric covers. It was, all high tunnels, including permanent ones, and with sheet metal on the top and that kind of thing. And that was taken out of the bill as the bill worked its way through the system. So it's just these non-permanent ones. But if someone wants to put one up, there's nothing you can do about it now, because they get to. So.
Yep. Here's a couple more land use bills. So HB 127. This deals with the grandfathered rental units, so the non-conforming uses involving rental units. And the real change to this bill comes in saying that land use authorities can't require changing an emergency escape window if it was legal at the time it was constructed in accordance with the applicable building code at the time, and if changing it would create some sort of physical damage or structural problem for the unit. And so, there's a sort of a narrow exemption from what a local government can require a non-conforming rental building to do with respect to those that specific area, the ingress emergency escape.
Let's go back to Heidi's question. Heidi has a question about the high tunnels. She's asked if it doesn't matter how big the non-permanent structure is or how many, and I don't see any limitation in the statute about that. It does define high tunnels, but it doesn't say how high or how big. It just says that it has a metal, wood, or plastic frame with a plastic woven textile or other flexible covering, and a floor made of soil, crushed stone, matting, pavers, or a floating concrete slab. So it can't be permanent. It can maybe be semi-permanent. but it doesn't say anything about the height or how many there can be that I can find. I don't see anything in there about that.
Yeah, I don't believe that's anything either. Thanks for the question. Another bill here, the drive-through service usage. This comes courtesy of Salt Lake, who changed some of their ordinances to make the city more biker-friendly and to allow bikes to be able to use drive-throughs. The legislature did not like that, and they pushed back, and they came up with this bill, which basically says you can't require a business with a drive-through window to service someone not in a vehicle. And by the same token, you can't require a business to have the same operating hours in the lobby as they do in a drive-through. So
this was interesting. I listened to the debate on all this bill. This bill came out of Salt Lake City because Salt Lake City, in their eagerness to have people be able to drive around on bikes instead of cars and so forth, passed a local ordinance that said that you cannot deny someone service at a drive-through if they walk up to the drive-through or bike up to the drive-through. And so that was a Salt Lake City ordinance. And the Restaurant Association and other folks, they did not like that. The restaurant owners did not like that. So they went to the legislature. It was interesting to hear the debate at the legislature because they were pretty conflicted. They were conflicted between the idea that local folks should have the ability to control what happens in their community. If Salt Lake City wants a certain thing, the state shouldn't be stepping in and telling Salt Lake City what to do and what not to do. They believe in local control up there, and they were conflicted between that and the idea that we need to help businesses. We need to keep businesses happy and help them to grow and also be safe. And there's a health, safety, and welfare issue here. There was quite a bit of debate about this drive-through window thing, which was, I thought, kind of ironic and funny. But at the end of the day, in a pretty split vote, they decided to go with, restricting the ability of Salt Lake City to do this and saying that if a restaurant wants to say no to a bike, the restaurant can say no to the bike. I think we're getting some questions up there that are not showing up. See that? Isn't the bicycle considered a vehicle according to state law?
It may be for certain purposes.
In some definitions, yeah.
So throughout state code, definitions aren't necessarily always consistent. And so there may be certain statutes that will consider a bicycle a vehicle for the purposes of that statute, and then other statutes will not consider it a vehicle for the purposes of the other statute. So it's important to, as you're looking at these things, make sure that you're looking at the definitions that apply to the statute you are looking at. So
the bottom line is that this gives the restaurant the ability to decide whether or not to serve bikes. And it says that a local government can't say one way or the other, you are going to serve bikes. It can't say you are going to serve pedestrians. So the restaurant has that option, but if they don't want to serve them, they don't have to serve them.
Another question? I can't see it.
No, I think that's it.
Okay. Great. So just because we move on here, we're going to go on to the government operations and regulations here. If you have another question from something we've already covered, don't hesitate to raise it. We're happy to go back, and we want to be able to address the questions that are on your mind. So don't hesitate to take us back.
Even if your question is, what the heck are you talking about, because I can't understand you, go ahead and put that in there if you want.
Amen. So in this new category here of government operations regulations, HB 70 relates to posting political signs on public property. And this is sort of an interesting bill because not so much for what it says. It's pretty straightforward that if local governments are going to allow political signs on public property, they have to permit people to post the signs subject to all of the same rules. They can't discriminate against different people. And they have to have politically neutral and content neutral rules and regulations relating to the posting. So it's not the actual contents of the bill that's interesting. It's just that this bill repeats what is well-established black letter First Amendment law that's been, been settled by the U.S. Supreme Court for years. And so, you know, it just seemed a little interesting that there would be a law on established and settled law.
This bill cracks me up. It's great. My understanding of how this bill came about is there was a local school district who allowed one of the candidates for the school board to put his signs or her signs on the school property, but no one else, no other candidate's signs, only the one that the school district actually wanted on there. So, you know, you do something like that, it results in a bill. But this bill is, I know there's some of you out there who are attorneys who I know and are smarter than I am. To me, this bill is utterly redundant because you already couldn't do that. That's unconstitutional to say, I'm going to put I'm the government and I'm going to put one person's signs up and not another person's sign. So we have to have a statute now to do this when, you know, it was already the law.
Luckily, I don't think this was controversial.
Yeah.
Which is, thankfully for that.
Yeah, I don't think anybody complaining about that would dare show their face.
Yeah. Yep. So, okay. Another bill here, public meeting notice requirements. This one removed the exemption that was in place for local governments with budgets of less than $1 million to post public notices on the public notice website. So that's a change for any of you out there with small budgets,
yeah.
$1 million. So be aware of that.
Any of you folks that work in rural governments, you know, become familiar with the public notice website. You know, we don't put public notices, you know, we don't do the same thing with public notices like we used to in the newspaper and so forth. They all go on the public notice website now. Whether or not that's a good thing is up for debate. I have my own feelings about it. But at the end of the day, now everyone, if you're a local government and you do a public notice, any kind of public notice, it has to go on the public notice website now.
Just kind of an off-topic plug here, but the background picture here is of Secret Lake up near Albion Basin, and just have to say, one of the places I love.
Oh, yeah.
So
beautiful.
Just a personal comment, forgive me, but dealing with HB 303, legislative approval of land transfers, this bill greatly reduced the amount of acreage that a governmental entity, which is defined in this statute as a state entity or county, you know, when one of those governmental entities is planning to sell that many acres to the U.S. government, they need to give the proposal to the legislature for approval. It used to be much larger, 10,000 acres. So this has certainly increased the notice and approval requirements. So.
Yeah, and it used to be too in the before that it was just states. It was just the state of Utah. If the state of Utah was going to transfer 10,000 acres to the federal government, they had to get legislative approval. Now it's the state or counties, and it's only 500 acres. And they even have to get approval if it's less than 500 acres. You know, I don't have to point out, you know, how this arises out of the atmosphere of the federal land debate that we have going in Utah. I mean, this is clearly an outcropping of that. It still doesn't apply to cities, though I don't know a lot of cities that own 500 acres that the federal government's interested in. But counties have been brought into this, and so if you're going to sell, you have to go through this process.
Okay, so HB 42, annexation amendments. This tweaks the annexation law that previously read that you could not, that itself was tweaked previously, but that used to say that you could not do an annexation that would leave an island or a peninsula. That was difficult for counties a lot of times to provide service to those areas. Because of a situation or two, they allowed an exemption to that requirement by saying that if both the county and the municipality agreed, then there could be an annexation that would leave a peninsula or an island. So.
The buzz I've heard about this bill, and as Jim said, you now can leave a peninsula or an island after an annexation if the county and the city agree. The buzz I've heard is that this is a bad idea and it's pretty unpopular. And I'm not sure I understand that. If anybody out there has any input on that, I understand that the islands and peninsulas are a pain in the neck, especially for counties. Counties that have to provide service in particular. There are a few counties that provide services, but not a lot. And I could understand why they would be concerned about that. but all they have to do is not agree.
Yeah.
It seems like to me, and there's no island. And so, you know, yeah, unless there's something that I'm not understanding, I don't understand why I'm hearing so much negative buzz about this one. So.
Yeah, pray, share if you know.
Yeah. All right. What's next?
Perhaps the favorite bill. We couldn't come to a legislative update and not tell you about this bill. So we really appreciate Representative Hawks for working with the office, and then we have a question.
We have a city island because we purchased the county airport. So you're part of the city, and the county airport is now part of the city. Is that what you're saying? And now there's an island, or are you part of the county?
Hold on one second. Let me see if I can open up Ty's.
Ty, are you there?
It's not allowing me to unmute Ty. He may not have a speaker or a microphone.
Well, I sure would like to talk to you, Ty, because, like I said, I'd like to know, what the implications of that bill is, and especially what the problems it might create. I'd really like to know that. So if we can't have that conversation now, give me a call.
I've been there. The airport is some distance from the municipality itself, I think, is the question. So it's not contiguous with the city limits of the municipality.
Okay. Well, I'd be interested to hear, if that's created any problems. If having the island and so forth has created problems. I don't know. I see that ties in Monticello. I don't know that San Juan County, provides a lot of services or has those kind of problems to worry about. And I can certainly see if I was in the city, what the benefits would be to have that annexed in.
Give us a call.
The Ombudsman's Office bill is a bill that our office put forward, and when we first put it forward, I got a ton of calls asking, what's this doing? What's the deal with this bill? What's happening with this bill? Yeah, this bill is the smallest, silliest bill. As a matter of fact, it's a good thing we introduced it early in the legislature, because some of the legislators rolled their eyes when they saw this bill. It was so inconsequential. And so really only the reason we bring it up is because, just so you know that it really isn't any big deal. What the deal is with this bill is that we just want to make sure that our role in relation to the people we help is understood. We want to make sure that the people we help understand that we're not their attorneys and that we can't represent them. Our role is basically as mediators. It's very common for people to come to us and ask us to do their legal work, and we don't want to do that. And we can't do that. It's really a conflict of interest to be both the mediator and the advocate. And so we just wanted to make sure that role was clear. And so we had this little bill go through, and it passed thanks to some good help we received.
Yep, we're the neutrals.
Jason, I cannot read that question.
With the county's approval, can we as a city?
With the county's approval, can we as a city annex a part of the county that is not contiguous? No, you still have to have, it still has to be contiguous. You can't just go out there and grab an island. The island and peninsula rule talks about leaving an island behind, okay? So if you have something contiguous and say it attaches at the top and it attaches at the bottom and leaves a chunk of unincorporated land there, if the county and the city agree, you can do that, okay? But the requirement in the annexation law about it being contiguous hasn't gone away, and I don't see how you can annex something that's not contiguous. So I don't see that that's changed.
This bill didn't change that.
Good question, though.
Thank you.
With the county's approval, okay, there it is. That's the one. That's the same question.
Okay. the failed bills, and again, we raise these just to let you know that these did come up and that they may be coming back in case there's anything here that you want to be watching for carefully during the next session.
These are the ones that we're guessing are going to come back.
So yeah, beekeeping amendments. There were quite a few changes that it proposed to the beekeeping regulation, but on the land use side, what it did is it would have it prohibited regulating any regulation of the bee raising by the political subdivisions. So this would have been removed from the zoning regime for local governments. So
yeah, this has been there and come back and been there and come back before, and it'll come back, and I don't know if it still has enough support to pass, but that's one of those kinds of things that always seems to circle back on us.
Where did that come from?
Who knows? You know, there's a lot of folks are saying we need more beekeepers because, you know, the bee population is not what it used to be, and they're not surviving as well as they used to. There's a lot of folks who just want to do their backyard farming, and maybe their neighbors are afraid that their kids will get stung with the bees and so forth. I haven't heard a specific story. It sounds like one of those bills where there might be a specific story, but you know, it's just one of those where I think they're saying let's regulate a fewer things. Let's not regulate things so often.
Thank you.
Public highway amendments is an interesting one. I'm sure that any of you with jurisdiction over any roads are familiar with the road by use statute. That's the statute where after 10 years of continuous public use, a road becomes a road. It becomes a public road. Especially if you're in rural areas, you certainly have a lot of those. There are a lot of those even in urban areas. Huge parts of Redwood Road are roads by use that were established because it was used for 10 years. The idea came about that we should get rid of those because there was a feeling that there are takings, that you're taking someone's property without just compensation by just taking someone's property and turning it into a road. This bill, this legislator and a couple other interested parties are very interested in this. This bill went through many changes, and how it finally ended up is that it was basically going to draw a line in the sand, and it was going to say, whatever is established as a road by use up to this day and is shown on a map as of this day, sure, that's a road by use, nothing changes, but after that, going forward, we're not going to have any more of these. There's going to be no more roads that are established because of 10 years of public use. That's kind of where it ended up, and that's kind of what the legislator would like to see right now. There was a lot of opposition to it. It's going to come back, and there's going to be more discussions. I think you might see something. I don't know if it's going to end up being like that, but I think you might see something that, you know, sort of the property rights folks are going to be very interested in making sure that something changes here so that people's property is not just being turned into a road.
So on the historic district amendments, this is a bill that arose, I understand, out of Salt Lake City again, the Harvard-Yale area, Yale Crest. You know, this has been sort of going for a couple of years, and this latest iteration would have required the consent of 75% of the residents before a legislative body could consider establishing a historic district. And I understand that this was one of those bills that was sure to pass, and then at the last minute ended up inexplicably dying. So
yeah, I was watching the feed on the internet when this bill came up. It went through the Senate no problem. It went through the committee hearings no problem. I mean, there was a lot of discussion and opposition to it. You know, this historic area issue is highly controversial because you get neighbors against neighbors. One neighbor who wants the area to be historic doesn't want anybody to change anything, and the next neighbor who wants to do something to their house, you know, and doesn't want it to be historic, and it's very controversial. And a lot of bills have come up, you know, addressing this, and this one came up and sailed through the Senate and got to the House, and there was a little bit of discussion on it, some talk about some amendments and everything, but nothing unusual. And the vote came up, and it got voted down by a very wide margin. The legislator was shocked. the legislator in the House was, he said, I don't know what to say, because, you know, by all indications were it was going to pass, and there was an audible gasp when it failed. You know, they'll just probably grease the skids and bring it back, but it's one of those things that goes to show you the lesson to be learned is nothing's a sure thing. You never know. So.
Okay. We'll leave you here with our contact information. You know, hopefully you feel like we really do want to hear from you if there's something we can do or questions we can answer or disputes that arise and we can help mediate or resolve. You know, we appreciate the trust letting us come and having a chance to have this conversation. And
since we have a few minutes, can we just take a few minutes and go back to something? And if anybody still has any questions, speak up about any of these things we talked about. But can we take a few minutes and go back to the first slide? Since we have a few.
That'd be great. And just while you're going there, just remind everybody you can type into the chat box. That's the easiest way to ask a question.
I do want to talk a little bit about this bonding thing, the first thing we talked about. And the reason why I want to talk about that is because I've heard some rumblings from some people who I listen to, like for example from some attorneys that this is not really being understood and followed. The rules about bonding, you know, and not only the rules that were passed this year were made necessary, but also the rules that were put in place a couple years ago about the difference between infrastructure improvement assurance and improvement warranties. It's important to keep in mind that most places I know what they do is they get one bond. They get a bond for improvement assurance saying you'll complete all the improvements, and then once the improvement assurances are complete, they'll release the bond, all but a certain percentage of it, and they'll keep that as the improvement warranty. You know, the things you need to keep in mind is that those two really should be separate. They're separate bonds and they have separate purposes, and you really ought to have separate agreements for both. You know, one is to make sure it gets built, one is to make sure it's built right after it's built. And once it's built, you have to release the improvement assurance bond. And the improvement warranty bond, you can only keep for 1 year and have for 10%. Those limitations have been put on there. Another thing that's important to remember about that is that whether or not you get an infrastructure improvement assurance, that's the bond to make sure they build the roads and to make sure they build the sewers and all that kind of stuff. That is, whether or not you do that is completely up to the developer. That's the developer's choice, okay? The developer can choose to build all the infrastructure before recording the plat. That's their choice. And so if they want to do that, if they want to build it all and then record, you can't require a bond on that, okay? If they come and say to you, I want to record, I want to start selling, you know, try to get some income stream going, that's when you say, okay, then you got to give us a bond. You got to have some kind of bond. It allows for a bond, it allows for a cash, it allows for a letter of credit, those kinds of things. But it's important to keep in mind that it's up to the developer to decide whether or not to build before they record. And if they do that, you can't require a bond. You accept the improvements, then you can require the improvement warranty after you accept the improvements. But it's their choice, and those two things kind of need to be kept separate. It's kind of important.
So we have a question that goes right along with that. Going back to SB 124, can a city still bond for private improvements such as parking lots, sidewalks, landscaping, storm drains that connect to the public system, et cetera? Also, does the bill say that if the improvements are part of the conditions of approval, can we still require it through a bond?
The thing about private improvements, you can't bond for private improvements, but there's really not a really great definition of private improvements. When the discussion was happening, it was things like that are clearly private, like you know, a clubhouse, something like that. You know, amenities, basically. Okay. You know, if there's a private road, if there's private sidewalks and stuff like that, and I mean truly private, like they're owned by the people who own the property and they're only to be used by the people who own the property, well, that's up for some debate whether or not that's a private improvement, and it's really not clear. I would say most of the time, you're probably safe in assuming that those are public improvements. They're not really amenities. I mean, they're necessities, you know. But I can see someone making the argument that, hey, this is a 100% private road, and so you can't make me bond for that. But again, the fact that you can't require them to bond for those private amenities doesn't leave you out of the cold as the local government. You know, if someone wants a private amenity, you know, I'm entering into a contract with that person about that private amenity, and some kind of contract that gives me assurance that it's being built, you know, and this statute provides for that. You know, let's have a development agreement. The development agreement is going to say, this is what happens if I don't build that clubhouse, you know. So, you know, that still provides you that insurance. It just isn't covered under the bond that you use for, you know, public improvements. But, you know, it remains to be seen. We need some kind of interpretation, some kind of guidance about how to determine what is really a public improvement in a private amenity. I would say most often roads, sidewalks, stuff like that are going to be public improvements and probably can bond. But I'm going out on a limb on that. I really don't have any authority to back that up.
Great.
The second part of the question, also does the bill say that if the improvements are part of the conditions of approval, can we still require it through a bond? I don't think you can, just because it's a requirement of a condition of approval. The bill says that if it's, you know, if it's a private amenity, even if you require the private amenity as a condition of approval, if it's a private amenity, you can't bond for it. And so just the fact that it's a condition of approval, I don't think gets you there. Jim is looking it up right now, though. He's going to take a look and see if he has a different opinion than me.
So I have a question going back to, and forgive me for not remembering which bill it was, but the exemption for municipalities. What does, is that only for public infrastructure? Basically, you could exempt something, a proposal from the zoning ordinance. What does that really cover?
Well, let's see. Which one are you talking about? It's a magic question. There was, in this bill, in SB 124, there's an exemption. You can make an exemption for a subdivision lot for utility infrastructure. So when you're subdividing, you can have a certain lot that wouldn't fill any of your other zoning ordinances, right? But you can still make that lot for utility infrastructure, for like a substation or a, you know, something that sits on the ground or something like that. So you can create a separate lot for that without having to worry about whether that lot fits the rest of your ordinances. So there's an exemption. I don't know if that's the exemption you meant. There's also this exemption about the high tunnels.
No, it was. You mentioned substation, and that was my question. If that was for any proposal, private, public, or if it was just for something like public infrastructure, like a substation or.
Yeah, it's really only for utility infrastructure. So you can only make utility infrastructure exempted from your subdivision code. And it really doesn't even, from my reading of it, doesn't even require that. It allows you to do that.
Yeah. They have the option. So if the local government doesn't choose to exempt them, then no exemption.
Okay.
Can we still require the surveyor to sign his legal description that is on the plat? Go ahead and look that bill up. Just picture it, guys.
While you're going through there, I had a couple of notes here that I thought were very important. The public notice website, and also the high tunnels. I'm planning on selling my house and building a high tunnel.
Oh, well, you know, that'll be nice and for the winter time. Thanks for the question, John, about the surveyor. The surveyor, yeah, absolutely can sign, you know, to ensure that the plat is accurate, right? To ensure that the legal descriptions are accurate and so forth. Really, the only change that this part about the surveyors makes is that in the before, it said that you can require the surveyor to sign for whatever reason. And now it just says you consult with the surveyor. So if you look at the language, it says, to the extent possible, the surveyor shall consult with the owner or operator of the existing or proposed underground facility within the proposed subdivision or a representative designated by owner or operator to verify the accuracy of the surveyor's description of the boundary course dimensions and intended use of the public rights-of-way, public easements, or grants of record. So, you know, it still allows to verify, still allows you to verify that. It's just that you can't require the surveyor to sign it, you know, to verify it. You see what I'm saying? And that's for the siting of utilities and so forth.
Okay.
I don't see any problem with having the surveyor sign to say that the descriptions and so forth are accurate.
Great. We just had one other question there that we hadn't hit, and that was if we can email this presentation out.
I don't know. Do you want to share this with everybody?
Sure.
There's a couple of folks on that list, but I don't think.
Well,
Okay. All right. We'll let it go.
We'll look one way or another there and make sure that works. Anything else you want to add before we wrap this up?
Please give us a call anytime that we can be of help to you. In looking over the list of the people who are out there, we know several of you. We appreciate your work and your assistance whenever we come knocking on the door. We have you know, great respect for the work you do, and we hope that you find that our office is helpful to you. If you find that it's not, please let us know. And if you have any questions about this or anything, you know, that's why we're there, is to help. And so please give us a call.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time and the effort that you put into outlining this. That was the most exciting legislative update I've ever seen.
That is one of the saddest things I've ever heard.
We even fought out of dam.
I know, right?
Yeah, that was great. There was a lot of really good stuff, and like you said, very few of these actually saw the light of day in the media. So it was beneficial for me to hear this. So thank you very much for that, and we appreciate the Ombudsman's office always providing great information for us. And like they said, please make sure you utilize their services. It's a great opportunity for us to be able to get some great advice and direction. I don't see anything else there, so we're going to wrap it up. Thank you very much, folks. I appreciate everybody's attendance, and everybody go out and have a safe day.
Take care, everybody.
All right.